The FBI's most wanted list is comprised of the most notorious and elusive criminals out there. There are a few notable fugitives hidden within this list that showed not only sheer cunningness and their ability to evade capture, but also how threatening and scary they can truly be. Thomas Brooks III is a convicted American criminal and fugitive who escaped his imprisonment and has remained at large ever since. His criminal career began on the 3rd of April in 1968, when Milton Carey Powell was busy closing up his hardware store on Roanoke Avenue in Newport. It was just after 5 p.m. when 2 teenagers walked into the store, firing at him and ending his life, all for just $400. This event had been witnessed by Milton's brother, Alan, and just 5 days later, 4 teenagers were arrested in connection with the crime. They were 19-year-old Clarence Alexander Spratley, the triggerman, 19-year-old Thomas Brooks, 18-year-old Raymond Hill, and another teenager who went unnamed. Spratley was subsequently charged with 2 counts of armed robbery, 3 counts of attempted homicide, and 1 count of attempted armed robbery for other crimes he'd committed up until that point. But prosecutors made a deal with him. If he testified against his accomplices, then he would not be prosecuted. Brooks had been tried first. Hill alleged that Brooks had given a firearm to Spratley. Following the robbery, he was then given $10 for his participation. But Brooks denied this and claimed that he wasn't in the area at the time that the homicide had taken place. But Hill maintained that he was there, and that he even heard 2 of the accomplices laughing about taking a hit out on Powell. So the young criminal was found guilty of first-degree homicide and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Spratley was also found guilty and given a life sentence after Allen had testified against him. Brooks was later sent to the Virginia State Penitentiary, where he would be serving his sentence. He was later assigned to the Nansemond Correctional Field Unit in 1970. That year, on the morning of August 24th, he was part of a work crew cleaning the ditches next to Route 662. Amid the cleaning and being watched by guards, Brooks just walked away from the site. He walked off and was never seen or heard from again. He was never recaptured and remains on the most wanted list. No clues as to his whereabouts have ever surfaced. The MS-13 gang is one of the most dangerous criminal organizations ever founded. Aside from the trafficking of illegal substances, the criminal group has been found guilty of human smuggling, homicide, extortion, and various other illegal activities. After being founded in Los Angeles in the 80s, it quickly spread throughout the United States, Central America, and Canada, gaining the reputation of extreme violence. MS-13 is said to be active in nearly every U.S. state, taking control over certain areas and forming alliances with the largest cartels. This criminal operation is known for recruiting young members, such as Mitchell Barrera, who found himself on the most wanted list when he was just 19 years old in 1998, described as a dangerous fugitive. His criminal career began in February of that year when he and an accomplice robbed a bank, stealing just over $20,000, the equivalent of about $37,000 today. A few months later, he and another accomplice robbed another bank, during which Barrera fired at an officer multiple times. The accomplice was apprehended, but Barrera managed to evade arrest and was never apprehended. He's been named a gang member and is wanted for charges of armed robbery, attempted homicide, and firing at police officers during a high-speed chase. Additionally, he's wanted for questioning in the case of Randy Gorenberg, who was abducted and fatally wounded in 2007. Barrera is considered a suspect in this case. In 2007, the 52-year-old was abducted and later turned up deceased in Delray Beach after having suffered a wound to the head. At the time, there was an onslaught of abductions, homicides, and robberies in Boca, which is now believed to be affiliated with the MS-13 gang. In 2011, Barrera was publicly named a suspect and a fugitive associated with one of the most feared gangs. An informant told law enforcement that MS-13 gang members may have assisted in the homicide of Gorenberg, leading to Barrera being named a person of interest and is believed to be working for the gang as a hitman. Barrera is known by other aliases, including Rene Case and Christopher Montefiore. The gang with which he's affiliated is known for its brutality, establishing a reputation of extreme violence by using machetes to slaughter whoever they please. MS-13 has been known to recruit at-risk teenagers who are required to be jumped in upon joining. This includes a 13-second beating and carrying out a crime, often homicide-related for the gang. Trying to leave the group is often much more dangerous. Large chest tattoos brand the members for life, which are between 6,000 and 10,000 just in the US. Frank Blackhorse is just one alias used by a member of a Native American movement. He's also known as Francis Blackhorse, James Bolt, Michael Houston, Bruce Johnson, Richard Tall Bull, and Cherokee. Much of his early life and personal history remains a mystery today, but one source suggested that he was born under the name Frank Leonard DeLuca. While it's claimed that Blackhorse self-identifies as Cherokee, it's believed that he's not a Native American. Supporting such claims is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which states that he's of Italian descent. Blackhorse claimed that he was born in Cherokee, North Carolina, but the FBI denied this and confirmed he was actually born in Cleveland. Previously associated with the fugitive is Father Michael Campana, who identified the most wanted poster of Blackhorse as Frank L. DeLuca, who was born in the city of Chicago. It's because of these contradictions that it's difficult to trace the man's origins. The only thing that's absolutely known is that he's wanted by the FBI for taking the lives of 2 FBI agents and another Native American during the Wounded Knee occupation that occurred in 1973. A report states that the Wounded Knee occupation took place in Wounded Knee, South Dakota. The incident had begun that February, representing the longest civil disorder known in history. The town had been seized by members of the AIM, a Native American movement of which Blackhorse belonged. They'd staged a 71-day occupation of the town, ultimately leading to retaliation by law enforcement. At the start of the incident, 1 FBI agent was left seriously wounded, and 2 Native Americans were fatally struck. On the 11th of March, during the occupation, Agent Curtis A. Fitzgerald took a wound to the wrist. Despite inconclusive evidence, Blackhorse was arrested, even though it hadn't been determined as to who fired first. After being charged, he was released on a $10,000 cash bond. At the end of the following year, a federal grand jury indicted the activist for the alleged firing at a special agent at the occupation. Blackhorse, though, failed to make an appearance at the trial, and he was issued a bench warrant. In addition to the Wounded Knee standoff, Blackhorse also found himself as a suspect in the Rest Mirrors, the name given to an alleged firearms standoff at Jumping Bull compound that had left 2 FBI agents fatally wounded. It didn't take long for him to find himself on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Leonard Peltier and Blackhorse were apprehended by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Hinto. They were taken to the Oak Hall prison farmer and later extradited to the United States. But the charges against Blackhorse were allegedly dropped, and some sources claim that he was never extradited. One source stated that Blackhorse had fled to Canada after participating in the homicide of civil rights activist Ray Robinson. To this day, the whereabouts of the wanted fugitive are unknown. According to other sources, he was allowed to disappear and never be heard from again. The FBI wanted poster indicates that he should be considered extremely dangerous and is wanted for his connection to the homicide of the special agents. Giovanni Motisi succeeded his uncle, Matteo Motisi, as the leader of the Pagliarelli family, one of the oldest mafia families in Italy. It was founded in the 1800s and came under the leadership of Matteo sometime in the early 90s. He led the organization until 1998 when he was assassinated. Giovanni, Italia's most elusive mafia boss, took his uncle's place. He's now considered to be one of the most powerful bosses of Palermo. Following the homicide of Toto Riina, he only rose in the ranks and eventually took over as head of Cosa Nostra, a Sicilian organized crime group. Giovanni is recognized as the last great Cosa Nostra fugitive who was involved in the early 90s explosive campaign that claimed many lives, including that of prosecutors Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. The campaign was distributed at art and religious sites littered all over Rome, Florence, and Milan, claiming more than 10 lives of civilians. He's also been connected to the assassinations of police and prosecutors across Sicily. The mafia boss, along with a commando of 9 other men, initiated the Palermo massacre, claiming the life of the head of the National Police Investigative Unit, along with his escort police officers. The massacre saw the crime group unleashing more than 200 Kalashnikov rounds. In 1998, Giovanni was named a fugitive and became Europe's most wanted man, but he evaded capture. In fact, no one has seen him for quite some time, leading to rumors that he may no longer be alive. But law enforcement refuses to believe this and maintains that he's hiding out somewhere in South Sicily. Since December of 1999, Giovanni Motisi has been the subject of a futile international search. He's the author of several homicides, organized assassinations, and the instigator of a massacre. The last known image of this fugitive was taken in 1999 at his daughter's birthday party, and no one has seen or heard from him since. The mobster simply vanished from the public eye, possibly orchestrating crimes from his underground hideout. Fausto Isidro Mesa Flores, also known as Chapo Isidro, is a prominent figure in Mexico's underworld and has been since the 90s, seemingly maintaining a low profile. He's said to be the leader of the Mesa Flores criminal organization, also known as the Guasave cartel. His influence in Sinaloa and the surrounding areas led authorities to designate him as a leader of a major trafficking group. In 2019, he was formally indicted and is currently one of the most wanted criminals in America. According to the United States government, Isidro has been trafficking large quantities of narcotics since 2000, all while evading his arrest. His operations are alleged to be run from Guasave. Other sources indicate that his criminal career began as early as 1997 while working for Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the former leader of the Juarez cartel. Following his passing, Isidro is alleged to have joined the Beltran Leyva organization, which is still allied with the Sinaloa cartel, which later became his rival. In 2011, reports indicated that Isidro's criminal activities became much more frequent, and authorities linked him to 32 corrupt police officers and the homicides of 16 people who were found burnt in trucks. It was also found that Isidro was the right-hand man of the captured leader, Hector Beltran Leyva, and served as his hitman. He and his cartel went to war with the Sinaloa cartel known as Anthrax, whom they defeated. In 2019, the federal court in Colombia indicted Isidro on convictions relating to the trafficking of illegal goods. In 2024, Mexican authorities were able to link the Mesa Flores organization to the record-breaking seizure of 20 million counterfeit fentanyl pills. In 2025, the Federal Bureau of Investigation added him to the top 10 most wanted list. Further investigations revealed that Isidro may be linked to a group known as The Office, which operated in Baja California surgangs and cartels under his leadership. The Office cartel allegedly took out 2 rival members under his leadership. Those involved in this criminal organization may include members from Familia Michoacana, the Zetas, the Gulf Cartel, and the BLO. One captured member of the groups told authorities that the organization was responsible for the slaughter of several local traffickers in Los Cabos. Isidro is noted to be one of the few kingpins able to evade capture for decades. He's also able to maintain an unusually low profile compared to other cartels and crime lords in the area. There's a reward of $5 million for information leading to his arrest. Isidro is considered to be heavily armed and extremely dangerous. It was 1980 in Austin, Texas, when a construction site turned into a crime scene. Someone had taken a large cache of explosives and detonating cords. It seemed obvious that whoever had taken these items was planning to put them to dangerous use. Following this discovery, small explosions would erupt across the United States for the next 5 years. The assailants had targeted New York City and some strategic locations across Washington. FBI agents investigating the cases declared that the dynamite being used in the explosions was the same that was stolen in Austin 5 years prior. After a thorough investigation, law enforcement pointed to a group that they believed was responsible for these dangerous acts. They named the remaining members of the May 19th Communist Organization as suspects. Police had already been trailing one of the members, Dr. Alan Berkman. When they eventually caught up to him in Philadelphia, they discovered that he was not alone, but was with a woman named Elizabeth Ann Duke. Both parties were heavily armed. At the time, law enforcement didn't know who Duke was, but he was going to become their worst nightmare. Upon their discovery, Duke was seen with her hands in her purse, holding a loaded Browning 9mm pistol with her finger on the trigger. Before a firefight could erupt, the police subdued both of them and they were taken into custody. This arrest led to the search of the house that Duke and Berkman were sharing at the time. Here, officials would discover what they'd been searching for since the 1980 incident. Explosives, detonating cords, and blasting caps were discovered in the home and were believed to be the same items stolen from the construction site. But since Duke was relatively unknown at the time, she was able to post bond and casually walk out of prison. Much to their surprise, police would later discover that she was involved with the May 19th communist organization, the Radical Group. In fact, Duke was an active member of the organization and carried out various attacks on the United States. The alliance's objective was to free political prisoners, but they did so using the most dangerous tactics. Between 1982 and 1985, M19 Co. set off many explosions, including that of the U.S. Senate, Israeli Aircraft Industries Building, Washington Navy Yard Officers Club, the South African Consulate, and the Policemen's Benevolent Association in New York City. Standout incidents also include the robbery of an armed car, during which a guard's life was taken, as well as 2 police officers. The group acquired $1.6 million from this robbery. After Duke had walked out of the prison, she hit the road and disappeared, supposedly continuing her violent acts within the organization. She's the only M19 Co. member not to have been apprehended and prosecuted. She's still at large today. Duke is known to speak fluent Spanish and has traveled to both the northern U.S. near the Canadian border and Texas. The FBI maintains that she is a dangerous fugitive who's linked to a violent individual. The Bureau is offering a $50,000 reward for information that leads to her arrest. Duke is incredibly intelligent and may be working as a teacher. Law enforcement has suggested that she may be in the company of Donna Joanne Borup, and she remains at large today. Vitel'homme Innocent started his adult life as a political activist, but this would soon wander into a life of crime, maximizing his influence. In an interview with CNN, Innocent claimed that he had owned several businesses before. This included a hotel and a rental car company, both of which were destroyed by powerful oligarchs. Following the destruction of said businesses, he resorted to becoming the most notorious leader of a Haitian gang. The gang's power only increased after the 2021 assassination of the Haitian president. Haitian law enforcement linked Innocent to said assassination, along with co-conspirator Joseph John, a former senator. John had been arrested and extradited to the United States in 2022, where he pleaded guilty to participating in the conspiracy to assassinate the president. In the wake of the assassination, many local gangs expanded, and Innocent ended up securing an alliance with 400 Mawozo, an incredibly powerful rival gang that was operating adjacent to them. The agreement allowed the 2 gangs to share the profits of crimes carried out with members from both involved. In October of 2021, Innocent and the 400 Mawozo collaborated and carried out the high-profile kidnapping of 16 U.S. Christian missionaries and 1 Canadian missionary. The missionaries were held for a ransom of $1 million. They were released 61 days after an anonymous individual paid an undisclosed amount, securing the release of the captives. The money was allegedly used to buy weapons, including AK-47s and AR-15s. This only furthered the gang's power, leading him to kidnap the CEP, the director of a major container port and a leading journalist. Innocent finds himself on the FBI's most wanted list for various allegations. These include kidnapping for ransom, theft, homicide, destruction of property, and vehicle theft. United States prosecutors indicted the felon for his role in the kidnapping of missionaries, as well as that of 2 U.S. citizens whose lives had been taken. Innocent's gang is one that is allegedly recruiting the most children and has reportedly abused human rights. The gang led by Innocent is seemingly fearless and has been known to regularly attack state institutions, as well as Haitian security forces. In 2023, the gang forcibly entered a police station, where they looted firearms and bulletproof vests before burning the building down. They'd also stormed the building of the Jamaican consulate, ultimately forcing its closure. Innocent is also known to have led the gang into targeting the wealthiest districts of Port-au-Prince. They'd opened fire in the district of Vivi Mitchell, just meters from the home of the former Prime Minister, Ariel Henry. A reward of up to $1 million is offered for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of Vitel'homme Innocent. Should he be captured and extradited to the US, he may be faced with the maximum penalty of life in prison or even capital punishment. Larry Porter Chism was born in December of 1948 in the small town of Forest City, Arkansas, located just 45 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. In 1970, he was drafted into the Army and served in Vietnam, from which he returned in 1972. Upon his return, Chism began studying law at Memphis State. Amid his classes and in his spare time, the law student was organizing a narcotics ring. He and other students at the college were smuggling drugs into Mexico. He was just weeks away from obtaining his law degree in 1974 when Chism was ultimately arrested. The charges were for operating a smuggling business in which he employed several students to transport said narcotics into Mexico for him. At first glance, the then 26-year-old presents himself as an ordinary, bookish man, allowing him to maintain a criminal life. Behind the veneer of his seemingly normal life, Chism was the ringleader of a narcotics enterprise. Following his arrest, the felon was convicted of armed robbery and distribution of narcotics and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But those steel bars and armed guards couldn't put a stop to his notorious operation. During his time in prison, Chism was the mediator between guards and inmates and even wrote for the prison newspaper. On the 13th of September, 1978, 4 years into his sentence, he and other inmates oddly went on a bowling trip at a bowling alley in Dixon, Tennessee. Chism needed to go to the bathroom, as did 3 other inmates, but one of the guards was suspicious of this and decided to follow them. Once Howard Talley was in the bathroom, he was met with a firearm from the hands of the felon. A stash of weapons had been left there by a friend. The guard and Chism opened fire on one another, and Talley was left severely wounded and his opponent with an injured hand. The felon, along with the 3 other inmates, then took a bowling alley employee, 18-year-old Carolyn Fielder, hostage. After firing at the prison guards some more, the group fled the area in a stolen vehicle. They headed for a nearby airport, hostage in tow, and eventually released her without harm once they were at Dixon Municipal Airport. But this would not be the end of the hostage-taking scenario, and the inmates were able to subdue the airport owner, who they forced to fly them to Arkansas. During the flight, though, the plane began running into some issues, and the hostage pilot was forced to make an emergency landing in Mariana Lee County. A passerby had seen the landing and drove over to help, ultimately allowing Chism to steal his truck. The gang of inmates at this point had split up, and Chism made it to Kentucky, where he stole another truck and kidnapped its owner. He was then involved in a back-and-forth open fire with police, which led to him crashing the truck. He was able to evade arrest for 3 whole days, but this was the end of the line for him. But still, those steel bars were not enough to subdue the inmate, and he escaped again in December of that same year. This time, his escape happened within a poorly secured prison. Chism had used a wrench to open an air conditioning vent, allowing another inmate to sneak in and make his way to the armory, where he took the keys from a guard. After unlocking Chism's cell, the 2 overpowered the guard and stole his vehicle, making yet another escape. For months, all traces of the fugitive went cold, until he seemingly surfaced in Cincinnati, Ohio. There, he walked into a First National Bank branch, posing as a U.S. Treasury officer. He showed the bank president an alleged explosive and demanded $200,000. He walked out and disappeared with the cash. The next lead came from New Orleans, where he was purportedly working as a manual laborer, where he'd also met a woman. In 1997, while working at a site, Chism had a bad fall and spent several weeks in the hospital and was later discharged. This was unknown to law enforcement at the time, and only came up after he was able to evade them. After this, Chism and his girlfriend, Linda Hicks, moved to Mobile, Alabama. Police were able to track them down, but before being able to arrest the fugitive, he vanished along with Linda. A week later, she returned to the area and spoke with police. She claimed she'd left them at a rest stop in Meridian, but this information was not enough to locate Chism. 10 years went by with no trace of the man until it was discovered that he was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was living under the name Kenneth Brookins and was married to a woman named Deborah. They'd never shared much of their life with anyone, and most didn't know where they lived. Fearing for his recapture, Chism left his family behind and was spotted later in Atlanta, Georgia, where he sold his van to a coworker. The last confirmed sighting of the fugitive came in December of 1990, after which all traces of him vanished. Larry Porter Chism goes by many names, including Jack Kaufman and Kenneth Brooken. A reward of $25,000 is offered for his apprehension. He's considered to be armed and extremely dangerous. Information regarding this fugitive can be directed to the nearest U.S. Marshal Service office or American Embassy. Australia's most wanted man, Christopher Dale Flannery, seemed to have been drawn to a life of crime early on. He was raised in the working-class suburb of Melbourne, Brunswick, Victoria. The neighborhood was rigid, and the culture there was suspicious towards law enforcement. His father, who was described as an abusive man, abandoned his family when Flannery was just 9 years old. At a young age, he dropped out of school and received his very first criminal conviction that year. By the age of 17, it appeared that he was fully committed to a criminal lifestyle. It was at that age that he committed some serious offenses, including possession of a firearm and assault on a policeman. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Even in lockup, though, Flannery threw around a defiant attitude, often aimed at prison guards and staff. Due to this behavior, he would often find himself subjected to brutal and illegal beatings from the guards. Prison only seemed to encourage Flannery's dangerous personality. It didn't take long for him to find trouble with the law following his release. He and 2 other men had robbed a luxury store in Perth and was taken straight back to jail and released again in 1997. It was this release that sparked a dangerous career path in Flannery. Initially, he took up work as a bouncer at a Melbourne nightclub, but grew bored with the job and pursued something more exciting. He ultimately became a hitman. By this time, he already had connections to underworld figures and even had a pool of potential clients whom he'd met in prison. For a fee of $50,000, he was willing to take out anyone. In a hostile climate of inner conflicts and criminal spats for control, Flannery's business would flourish. His first job was to take out the target Roger Wilson. In 1980, he and another man posed as detectives, handcuffed Wilson, and drove away with him. He was then executed by Flannery. Despite witness accounts, he was acquitted of the homicide. But as he was preparing to leave the court, he was detained again for the homicide of Raymond Lizard Loxley. He was acquitted of this as well. These run-ins with the law, though, were not enough to dissuade Flannery from a life of crime, and he continued to take many lives for a price. He would later find himself associated with gangster George Freeman, who was aligned with Lenny McPherson, another prominent gangster. Flannery began working as Freeman's bodyguard while still working as a hitman. But this came amid the Sydney gang wars, and he needed to put it aside. So he sided with the rival gangster Nettie Smith. Flannery's line of work and his choice of gang association made him a target too. In 1985, an assassination attempt was made on his life along with his wife. A spray of shells ricocheted off the car, but neither party was seriously injured. By this time, Flannery was not only a target for rival gangs, but also for crooked cops. Having been suspected of various vicious homicides, Flannery had now outlived his usefulness, and his associated gangs had now considered him to be a liability. In May of that year, his former boss, Freeman, arranged a meeting. But while waiting for a taxi, Australia's most wanted fugitive vanished. He was last seen by Nettie Smith, who claimed that a car had pulled up alongside him and offered him a ride. No one ever saw Flannery again, but he is considered to be Australia's most feared criminal at the time that he was active. Edward Lee Howard, the CIA agent turned spy, began his career in the American security system when he joined the Peace Corps in 1973, right after having graduated from the University of Texas in Austin. After going to Costa Rica for training for the Dominican Republic, Howard was reassigned to Colombia. His site was Bucaramanga, and in the middle of that year, he met the new PCV, Mary Cedarleaf, whom he later married. In 1974, he worked as a Peace Corps recruiter before meeting up with Mary, sparking a relationship with her and later returning to graduate school. In 1980, Howard was 29 years old, married and well-educated, and opted to apply for a position in the CIA. He was trilingual, held top-secret security clearance, and his background information was squeaky clean. He was the perfect candidate for the job, and just a year after applying, the CIA's Directorate of Operations hired him. His wife, Mary, would join him in the CIA that year too, and things were looking up for the Howards, who graduated from the farm, the secret CIA boot camp, together. But in 1983, after failing a lie detector test, Howard was dismissed from the promising job as a CIA agent. This unfortunate event brought him into a pit of despair. He was inconsolable, and the agency's worst fears would be confirmed just days later. Howard reportedly made several intoxicated calls to the American embassy in Moscow using a KGB-monitored direct line. During such calls, he exposed his former supervisor there as a CIA operative. This understandably alarmed the agency, but Howard refused any help. Eventually, he and his wife moved to New Mexico to start a new life, but in 1984 he hit rock bottom again. He landed himself in jail for assault with a fatal weapon, which was later reduced to aggravated assault. By this time, though, Howard was considered a felon. The real trouble would begin when the former agent was indirectly pinpointed by a Soviet defector, claiming that Howard was a KGB mole. A major operation had been blown. A case officer was exposed and had been released for espionage, and the ensuing investigation focused on Howard. Since he was the only officer who'd recently been pulled from the Moscow posting and had visited Austria with Mary in 1984, he was placed under suspicion. The FBI soon began watching the Howards and even secured a warrant to tap their phone. But they forgot one thing. The pair were not the typical couple and had been trained to foil those very techniques. The Soviet defector gave testimony against Howard, but there was still not enough evidence to link him to anything, and therefore he couldn't be arrested. The surveillance teams stepped up their techniques, and in 1985, Howard walked right up to one of them. He stated that he was ready to talk to them, but that he wanted a lawyer first, so a meeting was scheduled for the following week. The evening after, the Howards had plans for dinner. As the sun set over Santa Fe, Mary and her husband headed off for a night out. The FBI, of course, was still watching them, but when Mary turned the corner, Howard disappeared for a second, only to be replaced by a dummy. Upon turning the corner, the now fugitive deployed the jack-in-the-box trick by rolling out of the car and disappearing into the bushes. The head of a dummy, stuffed with clothes and adorned with a wig, now sat next to his wife. FBI posters began popping up all over. Wanted by FBI, Edward Lee Howard. Espionage, interstate flight, probation violation. It claimed that the supposed CIA agent turned spy was to be considered armed and dangerous. A brief description of the alleged mole was given, but it seemed that Howard had dipped under the radar. During his time under surveillance, he proclaimed his innocence and that he was being used as nothing more than a scapegoat for the real mole, Aldrich Ames. Howard was the small fish that was sacrificed for the much bigger fish, Ames, who would continue working for the Soviets. Upon Howard's escape, he was offered political asylum and was never apprehended by the FBI. In 1994, Ames pleaded guilty to spying on the KGB, and Howard maintained that he only fled because he didn't want to be the scapegoat. In 2002, the fugitive CIA agent succumbed to an injury after an accident that happened in his home, but the CIA was unable to confirm such information, leaving Howard on the FBI's most wanted list. It was the 7th of May in 2022 when Kai Higgby visited his mother in Maui, Hawaii. It was the day before Mother's Day, and he was there to celebrate with his mother. According to his wife, Samantha Higgby, Kai gave his phone to his mother and left. That was the last time that he'd been seen. A few days later, on the 12th of May, the wife contacted the police and reported her husband missing. That same day, his truck, a white Toyota Tacoma, was found at a local restaurant, Sunset Cafe, but the missing man was nowhere to be found. The restaurant is located on Front Street, close to Lahaina Harbor. The vehicle had been unlocked and his wallet containing his driver's license, debit and credit cards was in the back seat. This caused further concern since Kai was known to love his truck and worked really hard for it. He wouldn't just leave it there. It was admitted, though, that he would sometimes leave for a few days but never for that long. The two had 3 children together with whom he was extremely close. Kai couldn't wait to see his oldest son graduate high school on the 19th of May, and he would never have missed it, but he did. That day came and went with still no sign of the missing man. The Maui Police Department took over the investigation into the disappearance and posted on their Facebook page stating that he was last seen at around 11:30 p.m. Samantha revealed that she was not impressed with how the investigation had been progressing and believed it was being disregarded. She explained that her husband had a few run-ins with the law. She also said that he had substance abuse problems, but he'd been on the road to recovery, having been clean for quite a few months. He was a good person who made a few mistakes in his life, but was bettering himself. The disappearance came unexpectedly. The family had taken efforts into their own hands by pursuing their search and putting up posters about the missing person around Maui. They were also trying to hire a private investigator to aid in finding the missing man, but it's undetermined if they ever were able to do that. It was noted that Kai is often confused with his brother, who looks just like him. He would never leave his family behind, miss his son's graduation, or leave his beloved truck unlocked in the parking lot. No one at the cafe recalled seeing him, and it's unknown which direction he may have wandered off to. The investigating officers have found no evidence of foul play in his disappearance, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unclear. Kai is described as having brunette hair and brown eyes. He weighs around 185 pounds and is a height of 6 feet. He has a variety of traditional Hawaiian tattoos all over his body, including his chest, arms, back, and legs. The name Sammy is tattooed on his stomach. He was last seen wearing dark-board shorts and a white shirt. He was 41 years old at the time of his disappearance. Should anyone have any information regarding this missing man, you're urged to contact the Maui Police Department at 808-244-6400. David Owen Moffett was 70 years old when he disappeared on the 29th of September in 2023. He was last seen that day in Levering, Michigan, when he headed out with his dog Stella for a walk. David suffers from Alzheimer's disease, and this wasn't the first time he had vanished. Just 2 weeks prior to this, he'd gone for a walkabout but was found 13 hours later. He'd been asking for a ride to Rogers City, which he has no affiliation with. This event came after he failed to take his medication and couldn't remember where he lived. It was around 10 in the morning when David headed out with Stella, leaving his phone, wallet, and any other form of identification behind. Hours later, around 3:30 that afternoon, the Emmett County Sheriff's Office was contacted and the man was reported missing. One of his friends had seen David that day at 4:30 p.m. after he was reported missing. He was at Levering and Larks Lake Road, but that was the last sighting of him. A whole 6 days later, on the 4th of October, Stella returned home all by herself. After resting, the dog was taken back outside for another walk. She led searchers to power line easements, where they found some of her paw prints. This allowed investigators to narrow down the search area. 28,000 hours were put into the search for the missing 70-year-old. There were 100 to 150 volunteers assisting along with canine units, but no clues were unearthed during this effort. A few days later, on the 9th of October, the active search ceased, and the investigation switched to a clue-based one. The Sheriff's Department expressed gratitude to the community for its proactive involvement and tireless efforts. With the transition, the investigators would follow any evidence and leads and explore any avenues that may shed light on David's whereabouts, or what may have happened to him. Missing person flyers were made, and some were put up in sporting stores, alerting hunters to the case to keep a lookout for him while out in the wilderness or remote areas. David was placed on the National Missing Persons database, but no new information has been submitted. A Facebook page has been dedicated to the search for the missing man, called David Moffett Search and Rescue Updates. Pictures of him can be found, as well as one that's been used on the flyers with him and Stella, in case anyone recognizes the dog and can lead the authorities to the area where they may have seen them. On the page, they also detailed that he makes metallic sculptures and have posted some images of his metalsmithing skills. David is described as having white hair and brown eyes. He's 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighs around 135 pounds. On the day of his disappearance, he was wearing a green sweater vest, brown carpenter pants, a checkered shirt, and a baseball cap. Stella is a white dog with gray markings who'd been wearing a pink collar when she was on her walk with a black lead attached, but returned without both of those items. Anyone who has any information on the missing man is asked to make contact with the Emmett County Sheriff's Office at 231-439-8900. The disappearance also sparked a lawmaker, State Representative Neil Frisk, to propose new legislation changing the way that Michigan handles cases concerning missing adults with medical problems. The change proposed a silver alert system, similar to the amber alerts that were operated by the Michigan State Police. It would send out a message alert to the citizens regarding the missing person who has medical concerns. Allahnia Lenoir was born in Chicago, Illinois, to Janet Jackson and Abraham Lenoir. In 2008, the family relocated to Atlanta and lived in the Sugar Hill area of Georgia. They then moved to Douglasville, where the 24-year-old would suddenly go missing. She's said to love the outdoors and expressed an interest in cooking. Her family describes her as a happy and talented woman. She's fluent in Spanish and is a great caregiver. According to Janet, Allahnia is very close with her family and wouldn't just disappear randomly. It began on the 30th of July, 2022, when the mother and daughter spoke on the phone that morning. It was a normal day. They had a long conversation and even shared TikTok videos with one another. Around 8 that evening, Allahnia was seen on surveillance footage heading into the 1660 Peachtree Midtown apartments along with a female friend. The friend explained that they were heading inside to hang out and were meeting up with 2 men inside. The friend was seen in the footage leaving the complex around midnight, but Allahnia didn't show up on camera again. The next day, Janet received a phone call asking if the missing woman had returned. She hadn't. Initially, the mother wasn't concerned and thought that she'd gone to sleep or even met up with a relative or her boyfriend. That unconcerned feeling soon faded when she received various texts from some of her daughter's friends. They were asking where she was and that they'd made plans. This was uncharacteristic of her to miss these plans without notifying anyone. She began messaging her daughter, but they weren't going through, and the location was still set on the Peachtree Midtown apartments. On the 1st of August, 2022, Allahnia was reported missing to the Atlanta Police Department. Abraham hired a private investigator, TJ Ward, to aid in the investigation, leading detectives, forensics, and search dogs. The search efforts proved futile, and Allahnia's location remained a mystery. The authorities suspected that she might have met with foul play in the apartment, and they soon began arresting their suspects. 2 of the suspects were the men that she and a friend had met up with at the apartment. The first was Stephen Abois, and the second was Deontay Reynolds. Later, though, a 3rd man was also brought in as a suspect named Nicholas Hendrickson. The evidence connecting these men to the disappearance, though, was argued against by an attorney who questioned the credibility of it. The circumstances surrounding Allahnia's disappearance remain unclear, and her whereabouts are unknown. But efforts to locate her have not yet ceased. The missing woman is said to have had black hair and brown eyes. She's 5'4" and weighs around 120 pounds. She was last seen wearing a blue shirt, blue shorts, and cream-colored shoes. If anyone has any information regarding this missing woman, you're asked to contact the Atlanta Police Department Homicide or Adult Missing Person Unit at 404-546-4235. In 1971, Sabrina Leigh Long was born in Memphis, Tennessee. She was raised in Georgia, where she lived with Charles Daniel Corley, her stepfather. They resided in Ashland Drive after she'd moved out of her mother Sue's house in Bibb County, and in 1990, she graduated from the Southwest High School. After this, she worked at a bib manufacturing company where she cut packaging labels for linen products. At the time, she was also in a relationship with Scott Bradford. It appeared that her life was running smoothly until the night of the 13th of February, 1991. It was 11 p.m. when she completed her late work shift at the company and drove off in Scott's Chevrolet Camaro. Her own car had not been working at the time, and so she used his. At 11:30, she arrived at the place where her boyfriend was staying, who then dropped her off at Ashland Drive just before midnight. He was the last person to have seen her before she mysteriously disappeared. Charles wasn't home at the time, and later, a 3-page letter addressed to Sabrina's boyfriend was found. In the letter, she detailed that she was looking forward to cooking for him and had made mention of the Arsenio Hall show, which usually aired between 11:20 and 12:30. Between 12:30 and 1:30 that evening, she spoke to her mother, stating that she would be crossing the street to visit her friend Keith Daniel Lloyd to help him with a gift for his mother. She asked her mother to phone her back later, but she stated that she'd already be asleep by that time. At 3 that morning, Charles arrived home and found his stepdaughter wasn't there. He wasn't initially concerned because he knew that she often stayed over at Scott's house, but she would never return home or report to work the following day. Sabrina never retrieved her paycheck either. During the investigation, it was found that the missing woman had left her makeup, purse, and money behind. Her vehicle was parked in the driveway, the door was locked, and the lights inside were on. Later, a neighbor would claim that they heard some strange muffled thump, like a slamming door or a pounding on a wooden wall around 1:30. Authorities found no signs of a struggle, but found foul play was suspected. Police turned to Keith, who lived at the south end of Ashland Drive with his parents. He was 21 at the time and had been a friend of Sabrina's, with whom he attended high school. Mysteriously, he explained that the woman never came over that night, and his mother's birthday was a whole month away. He'd been with his girlfriend that evening and only got back home around 1:30. Over the years, he was subjected to various polygraph tests and was soon cleared as a suspect. But upon his passing, he left a note behind in which he alleged that a woman named Melinda McSwain was involved in Sabrina's disappearance somehow. In 1991, Melinda was 19 years old and a former classmate of both Keith and Sabrina. She resided on Bloomfield Drive. In 2018, she was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Through multiple statements, she admitted to the kidnapping and also implicated other people, but the statements were proven to be untrue. Still, she remained a suspect. In 2021, she was released from prison after a judge pointed out holes in the case and inaccuracies in her confession. Sabrina is said to have brown hair, blue eyes, and pierced ears. At the time of her disappearance, she was between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall. She weighed 127 pounds. When she disappeared, the missing woman was wearing a dark blue flower print dress and a gold necklace. The investigating agency is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which can be reached at 800-597-8477. Harry Dennis Milligan was born in 1962 and grew up in Avery, Iowa with 5 siblings. He'd been born with 2 club feet and needed surgery to correct them. He was said to excel at both football and basketball when in school. Milligan was a Marine Corps reservist, when the 21-year-old was last seen on the 1st of July in 1984. He'd been attending the Northeast Missouri State University, which has now been renamed the Truman State University. It all began on the evening of the 30th of June that year, when he'd gone out with 3 friends to Albia, Iowa. It hasn't been established what he'd been doing that night, but his last sighting came around 3:30 or 4:30 the next morning, on the 1st of July, in the Albia Business District. According to Mark, his brother, Milligan's friend had dropped him off at his vehicle around 4:30. He was last seen heading north on Main Street, and witnesses believe that he was heading home, 7 miles away. He had a softball game later that day. Milligan was driving his 1977 2-door Pontiac Grand Prix with plate number EIJ244. While friends thought that he was on his way home, he never arrived there and was subsequently reported missing to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. In many missing person cases, the victim's car is discovered abandoned if they'd been driving one, but that's not what happened. Milligan disappeared along with his maroon car. The family began handing out flyers and posted a $500 reward for any information that brought the man back home. His parents would pass away without ever knowing what happened to him. Authorities say that the investigation is ongoing when asked if foul play has been suspected. Since the disappearance, no suspects have been named. The investigative efforts have continued, with the most recent update being from June 2022. It was then that Chaos Divers, a private dive team, had gone to Iowa from Illinois to search for Milligan. They focused on Lake Miami and the ponds that could be found along Avery Highway, but no signs of the missing man or the vehicle were found. The whereabouts of Harry Milligan remain unknown, along with the circumstances surrounding his disappearance. At the time, he was said to be 6 feet tall and weighed around 160 pounds. He had scars on his feet from the corrective surgery. He'd last been seen wearing a blue plaid short-sleeved shirt with tennis shoes and blue jeans. Should anyone have any information regarding this missing person, you're urged to contact the investigating authorities, the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, at 641-932-5507, or get a hold of the Missing Person Information Clearinghouse at 800-346-5507. Mark suggested that his brother was at a bar called Waterworks, which was operated by Mike Stockner and was located at North Main Street. He'd been playing poker that evening, winning against Stocker. According to him, another individual named Raymond Ostermeyer had seen the car heading south instead of north as initially reported. On the 17th of April in 2023, the Marathon County deputies responded to a call regarding an Apple iPhone that had been discovered at the cul-de-sac of Ringel Avenue. When officers investigated, they found that the phone's owner was Tara Jane Sullivan, who was living in the village of Weston, Wisconsin, and working as a realtor at Realty One Group Haven. The following day, the authorities would head on to her residence to return the lost item, but Tara wasn't there and was nowhere to be found. The officer noticed that the garage door had sustained some substantial damage, as though a car had backed through it when exiting. Other than the garage door, the house appeared normal, but Tara was gone. The scattered locations of her belongings also added some complexity to the ordeal. Neighboring law enforcement agencies were promptly notified to keep an eye out for the now missing 47-year-old. That afternoon, a white 2017 Buick Enclave with a custom number plate MAT63 belonging to Tara was found. It had been left on the roadside close to Highway 29 in Shawano County, 30 miles from her residence. There were no signs of a struggle, and the keys were left in the cup holder. She'd vanished without her purse, which held her identification, credit cards, and cash. Ground searches quickly ensued in an effort to locate the missing woman. Canine units were brought in along with drones, but no more clues were ever found. It was later discovered that she had ties to the Fox Valley area, although nothing suggested that she'd traveled all the way there. The sudden disappearance was referred to as suspicious because of the damage to the garage. No one is certain if she left of her own will or was abducted, and her case remains unsolved. But it gets stranger. When the authorities had a look at her phone for any messages that may have indicated where she could have gone, oddly, there were no messages that were story-like. There would be one or two messages back and forth with a few contacts, but nothing that could be used as a crucial clue. Tara was also not close to her family, and attempts to contact them proved futile. According to her boss, she also had an ex-partner at the time, but he was ruled out as a suspect. According to her Zillow page, Tara had been a realtor for 10 years and would specialize in vacation homes. Her bio detailed that she enjoyed outdoor activities, including snowshoeing, biking, and hiking. Upon further investigation, it was found that she had not renewed her realtor license and hadn't been shown any houses at the time. Her social media pages also revealed that she was religious, but wasn't affiliated with any of the churches nearby. Something happened at the house, and whatever it was, it happened quickly, according to investigative members. But the strangeness doesn't end there. According to a police captain, the state crime lab never swabbed her car for DNA. They stated that swabbing a car would be difficult since they didn't know who had been in it within the past year. Swabbing would just mix the DNA together and no good results would come from it. But the detectives had already indicated that Tara was a private person who had no current partners, pets, family, or friends at the time. At the time of her disappearance, the missing woman had strawberry blonde or red hair, although her current hair color is unknown. Tara has green eyes. She weighed around 128 pounds and had a height of 5'7". If anyone has any information regarding the missing person or their whereabouts, you're asked to contact the Marathon County Sheriff's Office at 715-261-1200 and dial option 5 to speak with an investigator. Her agency case number is 2300-1228. Age of incident, 61 years old, 90 to 115 pounds, a height of 5 feet and 4 inches. Hair color, brown. Eye color, brown. These were the details listed on the NamUs website for missing person number 26418, Christy Lynn Richardson. She was born in 1952 and married her high school sweetheart, Ronald. Together, they had 2 children who they raised in Casper, Wyoming. Ronald passed away in 2013, and the following year, on the 6th of October, his wife disappeared without a trace. At the time, she'd been running Richardson Trucking, a respected oil trucking company that's located in the 6800 block of West Yellowstone Highway. Christy was last seen at her residence on East 24th Street in Casper, Wyoming, at around 7:45 that evening. The next morning, she didn't show up for work. Her family and co-workers immediately knew something was wrong. Her daughter Amber and her husband Pete headed to 24th Street and found the car still parked in the garage. But Amber's mother was nowhere in the house, which was also found locked up. Concerned, she called the authorities, and a case of missing persons was opened. During the investigation, a purse belonging to Christy was found on the kitchen counter, containing $700 and her identification. Her cell phone was found underneath the bed. While the cash was still in her purse, something was missing: the garage door opener. The bed sheets had been stained with something that was unidentified at the time and was thought to be vital fluid. Phone records indicate that the missing woman had taken a routine phone call around 7:45, but didn't answer another call that came at 11 p.m. Detectives placed her time of disappearance somewhere between 7:45 and 11:30 that evening. When authorities had a look into the trucking company's financial records, things began to take a turn. They found love letters from an employee named Bud Boyles. Upon receiving the first notes, she informed her husband, who confronted Boyles, but the letters never stopped, and she never reported the persisting letters to the police. But she had saved them all inside the man's employee file. Apparently, he had also quit his job just a few days before the woman went missing. Her children also added that their mother was becoming increasingly afraid of the ex-employee. He was interviewed many times and stated that he wasn't in the neighborhood that evening. Phone records have shown that he hadn't been in the area before 8 p.m., but his whereabouts after that are unaccounted for. He'd never been connected to the disappearance, but it's agreed that the letters indicate obsession and an escalating anger. Authorities state that she certainly went missing under some suspicious circumstances and may have been met with foul play. At the time, the family was offering a $250,000 reward for any information regarding the disappearance of Christy. She was last seen wearing denim capri pants with a solid-colored shirt and flat shoes. She may have been wearing the Brown University Wyoming Cowboys sweatshirt, which had a bucking horse logo on the back. The Casper Police Department can be reached at 307-235-8202 should anyone have any information regarding the whereabouts of this missing person, or any information leading them to the person responsible. Jance Wesly Varela moved from Montana to Colorado back in 2018. He was staying with some friends in the Fort Collins area after he lost his apartment. He had undergone surgery, after which he struggled with homelessness. He had a rather rare disorder that caused tumors to grow on vital organs, which is why his case is so incredibly urgent. He was last seen on the 1st of June in 2022 in Loveland, Colorado. Just before completely disappearing, he told his mother, Linda Varela Adams, that he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. The tumor was reportedly already affecting his hands and may have been impairing his judgment. Jance stayed in contact with his family, and it was uncharacteristic of him to leave without informing them. The last confirmed sighting of him was at a bowling alley 50 miles north of Denver. His mother's birthday was on the 1st of July, and she would be 60. When Jance failed to phone her, she knew that something was wrong and quickly filed a missing person report with the Larimer County Sheriff's Department. He'd not been seen for a whole month. Unfortunately, the authorities were slow to react, stating that there was no foul play suspected and that he was not at imminent risk. An active search didn't ensue. The authorities interviewed some of his friends and followed up with some tips, but no clues as to his whereabouts were revealed. It wasn't until the following year that the investigation confirmed that there was a concern for the missing man's well-being. A Searching for Jance Varela Facebook page was created by Linda to initiate some more action. Volunteers embarked on ground searches, and flyers were distributed, but to no avail. Linda was able to build a network of people who were just as invested in finding the missing man, including a local group called Justice Takes Flight. One of the Facebook followers had even paid for several billboards detailing Jance's disappearance. While a spokesperson indicated that the authorities did not dismiss the missing person case, the family stated that they simply deemed that Jance had run away and cut ties with the family, even though there was nothing to indicate that this had been the case. Jance is detailed to have partially gray or salt and pepper colored hair and brown eyes. He stands at a height of 6 feet and 4 inches, weighing around 140 pounds. At the time, he had a beard and may be wearing glasses. An identifiable feature would be the scar on his abdomen and the pi symbol tattoo, which can be found on his left hand. A cash reward is being offered for any information that leads to the whereabouts of this missing man. Anyone with information is asked to get in contact with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office at 970-498-5100. His agency case number is SO22-000-5611. Frederick Joseph Bow, or Little Joe, was last seen on the 25th of January in 2001 in Marshall, Texas, his hometown. He was an outdoorsman, a hunter, and a fisherman. He was living with his best friend Coley Briggs on Victory Drive temporarily when he went missing. The house was inhabited by Coley's family, including his girlfriend and their children. Frederick wasn't married and had no children, but he did have a girlfriend as well at the time. The 23-year-old was dressed and ready to get some sleep that evening when he received an unsuspected and unidentified phone call on the house phone sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight. After the call, he changed his clothes and headed out on foot. He was last seen walking west down Victory Drive toward the downtown area. Coley's girlfriend had been on the porch, and he told her that he would return in the morning, but that didn't happen. He never returned to the house and hasn't been heard from since. On the 3rd of February that year, his sister Jolene Oney contacted the Marshall Police Department and filed a missing person report. Her brother had already been missing for a week by this time. It was found that he didn't have any transportation because his truck had been involved in an accident not long before his disappearance. 2 unconfirmed sightings were reported by 2 people who'd seen a man matching the description of Frederick walking around Marshall. Authorities suspect foul play may have been involved in the event, but the circumstances remain unclear. Even though investigative efforts were carried out, the caller was never identified. It was also determined that he'd not disappeared intentionally, as he was supposed to dog sit for his friend who was leaving town. Frederick leaving unexpectedly like he did was said to be uncharacteristic of him. The officers thought that the case may have been narcotics related, theorizing that he owed some people money, but he had left thousands of dollars behind in his account when he disappeared. The missing man is said to have had brown hair and hazel eyes. He stood at a height of 6 feet and weighed around 130 pounds when he vanished. He has a scar in the middle of his forehead and a tattoo of a Confederate flag on his right arm. He possibly had a mustache, beard, or goatee. Frederick was wearing a gray shirt, a green Realtree camouflage jacket, boots, and blue jeans when he went missing. He may have had a .357 Magnum with him upon his departure. The man would now be 47 years old and is alleged to have been on medication for anger at the time. If anyone has any information regarding this missing person, they're encouraged to contact the Marshall Police Department at 903-935-4546 or the Texas Attorney General Cold Case and Missing Person Unit at 512-936-0752. Marsha Ellen Brantley was born in Illinois. In 2000, she married Donnie Brantley, and they moved to a house that her parents had built in Cleveland, Tennessee. That same year, both her parents succumbed to cancer, and she received a large inheritance. She helped her husband start up a handyman business and quit her own job as a housing director to pursue her passion for young adult novel writing. During this time, she had a blog titled The Magpie's Nest, where she would recount stories of her day-to-day life. She enjoyed writing, gardening, and embarking on some outdoor activities. In 2007, she and her friends started a writers group called Thunder Rock Writers Group. In 2009, the 50-year-old woman mysteriously disappeared. It was either in June or July that she'd gone missing, and she wasn't reported missing initially because Donnie claimed that she left voluntarily. They've been living with 3 foster dogs in the Benwood subdivision. They have no children together, and Marsha had no siblings. It was this same year that she told her friends she couldn't get off the couch. In April, she went to see her hairdresser and told her that her husband's business was starting to fail. Another hair appointment was set up 6 weeks later, but Marsha never showed up. On the 2nd of June, her last social media post was made. After this, she was never seen or heard from again. What drew attention to her sudden disappearance was that she had not been out walking the dogs, and the flowers in the yard were brown and shriveling. Conflicting sources state that in July or August, Donnie had told a neighbor that he and Marsha were in the process of divorce. The woman's disappearance wasn't reported until that November. It was filed by her hairdresser, who made contact with the Cleveland Police Department. An investigation into the disappearance began in November. It was found that she'd left behind most of her belongings, including her cell phone and car. Cell phone records indicated that she had disappeared between the 2nd of June and July of that year. Her husband became a prime suspect in the investigation, since they were experiencing a troubled time because of their failing business that was draining Marsha's inheritance. In 2013, Donnie was arrested, but the charges were dismissed because there was no evidence tying him to her disappearance. The authorities suspect that foul play may have been involved here, but there's no physical evidence of this or even a crime scene to analyze. Marsha has brown hair and blue eyes. She's said to be a height of 5'8" and weighs 125 pounds. Her maiden name is Rader, and she may be referred to as Marsha Rader Brantley. The investigating agency is the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, which can be reached at 800-824-3463. It's also encouraged that should anyone have any information regarding this missing woman, that you contact the Bradley County Sheriff's Office at 423-728-7330. Her NamUs case number is MP8786. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, Otis Elwood Tulle was raised by a single mother who is reported to be a cruel woman. She and Tulle's grandmother were both extremely religious, but this wasn't enough to steer the young boy away from a life of crime. While still in school, he would allegedly commit his first homicide, though reported to be an act of self-defense. Not taking well to life in a classroom, Tulle opted to drop out and instead began committing minor offenses. These minor offenses, of course, served as a gateway to something major. Unbeknownst to him at the time, just years earlier, Tulle's inamorado was born. That man was Henry Lee Lucas, one of 9 siblings in Blacksburg, Virginia. As is so common in these stories, Lucas had a disturbing upbringing. His parents were alleged to be ruthless alcoholics, with his mother being the iron fist of the household. Much like his later counterpart, he would also turn to a life of petty crime. But it didn't stay that way for long. By the time he was 23, Lucas would find himself incarcerated for the homicide of his mother. He headed to Jackson State Penitentiary in southern Michigan, but was later transferred to Ionia State Hospital and was paroled in 1970. After attempting to kidnap a young girl, he found himself back in prison and was released in 1975. This would be the makings of a horror movie. That year, Lucas found himself in Michigan working odd jobs and finally landed in a Jacksonville soup kitchen. Conveniently, another suspected homicidal maniac was working there too, and it was Tulle. By now, the petty criminal was already suspected of 4 homicides and was a serial arsonist. Considering their dark and disturbing pasts and obsession with slaughter, it didn't take long for the pair to join forces. Not only did they become engaged in a romantic relationship, but they would also become co-conspirators in a homicidal spree. Though the exact extent of their crimes remains a topic of controversy, Tulle supposedly confirmed that he'd accompanied his partner in 108 homicides, some of which were allegedly being committed by decree of a cult. Throughout the 70s, the evil pair would make their way through 26 states, slaying as many people as they could find. They often found their prey in the form of hitchhikers, ladies of the night, and even migrant workers. They would lure them into quiet areas, the victims unaware of the violence that lay in wait. Once out of view, concealed by darkness, the predators would pounce, and the bodies began to rack up. These frenzied assaults were nothing more than a bonding ritual for the couple. Though their crimes were gruesome, neither felt the slightest bit of guilt or remorse. It was just their way of life. But then, something unexpected happened. The relationship became rocky, resulting in Tulle's abandonment, with Lucas having run off with his partner's niece. In an effort to blow off some steam, Tulle slayed another 9 people. In the interim, Lucas lured Betty Powell into an isolated field, claiming her life and scattering her remains. Not long after that, Lucas was arrested in Texas, and by 1984, both men were behind bars. For years, they'd committed these atrocious acts together as a pair, and as such, they would begin confessing. Lucas would confess to more than 600 homicides, an admission that caused suspicion among law enforcement. They didn't believe the confessions were true, but still he was egged on by investigators, which only led to increasingly far-fetched ideas. The encouragement of confession, which earned Lucas more outside time and access to fast food left behind a chilling mystery. How many victims were truly claimed at the hands of Otis Tulle and Henry Lee Lucas? Number 9. It was 2007 when 2 bodies turned up in Louisville, Kentucky. One of them was that of 69-year-old Hugh Patrick O'Dea, and the other was an unidentified victim. At first, they seemed unrelated, but local police soon made a connection between them and several other crimes that were taking place across the country. After making a few other connections, it dawned on them. It was another case of Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, an unofficial term used to describe couples who commit crimes together, and this pair was the perfect example of it. It's uncertain as to where and when their escapade began, or who was the one to initiate it, but misery loves company, a term that rang true when it came to 27-year-old Greenwood resident Jeremy Brooks and 28-year-old Cody Martinez from Cutoff. Brooks' ring moniker was Superstar, a heavyweight boxer, partnering up with a destructive woman. Their union left fear in their wake as they made their way across multiple states, turning unsuspecting people into victims. At some point that year, the criminal couple was kicked out of their home for making narcotics. But their criminal activities wouldn't end there. On the 2nd of June, the pair had attempted to rob a motel and had the intention to commit homicide during the act. After Martinez successfully lured an unsuspecting victim to a hotel room, Brooks grabbed a malt liquor bottle and a tire iron, callously striking him. A warrant for their arrest was issued, but they managed to evade capture and soon landed upon O'Dea's doorstep. It was July when the 69-year-old vanished, the only evidence being some grainy video footage of a man believed to be Brooks. The following month, that missing man was found deceased in a nearby wooded area. In an apartment on St. Paul Court, an unidentified victim was discovered. The modern-day Bonnie and Clyde were seemingly incautious with their spree. They were spotted several times on surveillance cameras, allowing police to track their every move, including another act in Minnesota that saw the slaying of 58-year-old Ruth Ann Overson, who was meaninglessly discarded in a bedroom closet. Police would spot this infamous couple using the victim's card at an ATM, as well as making off with Ruth's vehicle. Martinez and Brooks seemed to think that they were untouchable, which made them even more terrifying, but it also made them all the more careless. Realizing how trusting many residents of North Dakota were, the couple planned another fatal robbery. Martinez walked up to the door of a resident's home, who was 86 years old. Using the ploy of asking for help with food and money, Martinez got the elderly woman to open the door, but she immediately became suspicious, leading her son to call the police. Martinez was the first of the criminal couple to be caught. Not long after, Brooks would show up looking for his beloved. When he realized that the plan had gone awry, he ducked into the farmland, and a massive manhunt ensued. In an effort to distract the police, Brooks began setting fires to the barns and buildings. The farmland was ablaze and filling with smoke, making the search efforts even more difficult. But eventually, the assailant was spotted in a wheat field a mile away from the last fire. Together, he and his lady love would be incarcerated, facing charges of homicide in the first degree and armed robbery. Number 8. It was in Jacksonville, Florida, where one of the most gruesome double homicides would unfold. It was 2005 when Reggie and Carol Sumner, both over the age of 60, retired in Jacksonville. This would mark the final chapter of their life, only for it to end quicker in the most nightmarish way possible. The Sumners would meet their untimely demise in a 6-foot deep hole near the Florida-Georgia border. They were a frail and kind pair, which makes their homicides even more disturbing. It was a harrowing event that begged the question, who would want to end their lives? It turned out that a former neighbor, aided by her co-conspirators, was behind it all. Seeing their ailing health as an opportunity, Tiffany Ann Cole and her boyfriend, Michael Jackson, devised a cunning plan. The motive being robbery. It seemed, according to the daunting duo, that whatever the Sumners had was worth the carnage. So one fateful day, their harrowing plan commenced. Aided by another 2 individuals, the pair got to work. Cole was the one to dig the premature burial site several days before they would launch their attack. The couple and their 2 friends broke into the home, where they bound the unsuspecting residents with duct tape and forced them into their own car. After successfully robbing them, Cole and Jackson drove them to their pre-dug graves, tossing them in, and began to fill the human-sized holes. Though the couple murmured in resistance as sand began to cover their bodies, the group continued. The elderly couple were subsequently buried alive, and the force driving their terminators was mob mentality. What started out as a double disappearance leaked into a double homicide investigation. Luckily, the victims wouldn't go unavenged, but it was the perpetrators' very own mistakes that would lead to their apprehension. Thinking that they would get away with it, Cole and Jackson continued their daily lives, red-stained cash in hand. Little did they know that Jackson had left behind a crucial piece of evidence in the Sumners' home: fingerprints. He was also spotted on surveillance camera without drawing money from his victims' accounts several times. These indiscretions made it easy for law enforcement to catch up with them and manage to track them down to a motel. A search warrant led to the discovery of stolen credit cards, documents, and identification belonging to the missing Sumners. From there, the case flew wide open, leading to charges of 2 counts of first-degree homicide, kidnapping, and robbery. Cole, the impetus behind the ordeal, found herself becoming one of the youngest women to be condemned to death row, awaiting execution for her misdeeds. Number 7. They were just an unassuming suburban couple whose life was once described as normal and became synonymous with notorious. Jeffrey Erickson met his beloved wife, Jill Sandra Cohen, at a bar back in 1981. He had just been discharged from the Marines, and she was a high school senior. It was the beginning of a love story. Erickson found himself quickly infatuated with Cohen's long blonde hair, and soon discovered that they had something in common. They both hated dancing. Through this common denominator, the two began chatting, unveiling their backgrounds, and falling in love. It was found that Erickson, while in the Marine Corps, had been awarded for his marksmanship skills and had been honorably discharged just 1 year before their meeting. From there, he would work as a mechanic and maintain several other jobs simultaneously. Cohen was the daughter of a pharmacist. She was also known to be a bit of a loner, dating back to her early high school years, but that label was about to change. As they sat talking in the bar, the pair learned of their mutual love for animals, as well as their mutual hatred for dancing. Erickson nicknamed the stranger Gorgeous, and just 6 months later, she dropped out of Buffalo Grove High School and moved in with the ex-Marine. Allegedly, the young woman wanted to escape the pain of impending divorce between her parents. 2 years went by before the pair got married. It was a civil ceremony attended by each of their parents. From there, life carried on for the Ericksons. They went to work, accumulated pets, often chatted with neighbors, and rode motorcycles, usually in the middle of the night. They seemed to be an ordinary couple, the usual you would expect for Illinois residents. Erickson had found work as a truck driver now, and Cohen was a lab technician. They settled down and only moved when their neighbors began to complain about their dogs and birds. In 1986, Erickson was a police officer in Hoffman Estates before being dismissed due to his alleged lack of common sense. Then, on the 9th of January, 1990, Normal would become notorious. It was that day that Erickson would rob his first bank. He walked into the first nationwide bank, the Willamette branch, wearing a fake beard, hat, glasses, and driving gloves. Then, with a police scanner in hand, he would announce a holdup, prompting bank employees to fill up a bag with any cash they had. He soon became known as the Bearded Bandit. In the interim, Cohen set up a getaway car. The same modus operandi would be executed with military precision several more times over the next 2 years. Just 1 year into their robbing spree, the couple purchased a townhouse on Waterford Drive in Hanover Park. They were recognized as loners by the locals and were described as nocturnal when heading out on a nightly routine revving their Hondas. That same year, with enough money, they opened a bookstore in Roselle called Best Used Books. Charmed by Erickson's knowledge of the classics, customers were plentiful. But by wintertime, Erickson alleged that his beloved partner in crime had fallen ill, possibly due to alcohol, and was said to be diagnosed with mild schizophrenia. By the end of the first year of their robberies, officially having committed 8 of them, the pair found themselves on the police's radar. On the 10th of December, during a police stakeout, the notorious couple arrived at a parking lot in a gray van. This was their 9th robbery mission, which they wouldn't be able to complete. After surrounding the vehicle, Cohen opted to speed off, and a car chase ensued. At high speeds, the chase pressed on for 11 miles, up until she made a turn, entering a contained residential development. She was cornered. In a panic, Cohen drew a firearm, and officers did the same. Bangs and clanks interrupted the silence before one final strike hit the assailant. The hail ceased, and the woman was found lifeless in the driver's seat. As for Erickson, he was arrested in connection with 8 other robbers, who allowed them to net at least $180,000. Police would also find a treasury of 38 different firearms, 25 boxes of ammunition, smoke grenades, gas masks, and burglary tools. By 1992, Erickson would finally be indicted, and his trial began. And 7 days later, the bearded bandit was transported from the courtroom when he managed to get his hands on the handcuff key. After freeing himself and grabbing a firearm, he was fatally wounded by one of the deputies, and another combat involving lethal weapons ensued. Erickson was fatally wounded, joining his partner in crime and ending the terror that they'd unleashed upon the banks of Chicago. Number 6. Speaking of unassuming and normal, the Copelands were an older couple, motivated by good old-fashioned greed, prompting them to commit violent acts on their Missouri ranch back in 1989. It's this duo that's been recognized as history's worst serial slayer couple. Ray was born in Oklahoma on a dirt farm in 1914, and he drifted around the Dust Bowl in search of work. Although it may come as a shock to his family and friends, he was already engaged in a life of crime. To finance his travels, Ray would commit small-time check fraud and leave before he was ever caught. Later in life, he would become a cattle rustler, and that's where you'd think his life as a fraudster would end. But instead, Ray would purchase animals at the market using fraudulent checks and then sell them for cash as quickly as possible. During this chaotic and illegal money-making scheme, he would meet his co-conspirator Fay, and by 1940, the pair were married. But their marriage was far from suitable. They would spend it moving from town to town, trying to stay ahead of their reputation, with Fay, of course, also involved in the fraud. During the 50s and 60s, Ray found himself in and out of jail a lot of the time, which dominated much of the relationship. Eventually, sometime in the 70s, they became tired of the fugitive lifestyle and worked out a way to make money legally. It isn't known just exactly what the two had done to make money during this time, but it was something that wouldn't last. By this time, Ray was a known fraud, which put a massive hole in efforts to make money. Locals wouldn't buy his stolen cattle anymore. So, in the late 80s, the couple's Missouri ranch became a mass grave, and the duo went back to their fraudulent nature. The Copelands would hire the odd drifter here and there, and would write them false checks and have them go to purchase cattle. He would then sell the cows for profit, all before the checks bounced. The drifters had no knowledge of the checks being fraudulent, and to ensure their silence, Ray would draw his Marlin 22 and bury the bodies in the barn. Most disturbingly, Fay would use the victims' clothing to sew quilts. By 1989, Copeland's successful transactions totaled 5 victims, but it would be that year that their financial scheme and homicidal spree was finally stopped. One of the farm employees had spotted human remains on the property and called the police. Their disturbing plot quickly unraveled, and the Copeland couple were arrested. Fay quickly turned on Ray, claiming to have been a victim of his ill temper for the past 50 years, but the jury saw through this charade and deemed them both equally guilty. Number 5. It was 1979 when 31-year-old Doug Clark, a U.S. Air Force veteran, landed his eyes on 37-year-old vocational nurse Carol Bundy. The two would meet in the Little Nashville bar in Hollywood and soon found themselves in a whirlwind romance. This almost immediate partnership saw the couple moving into Bundy's apartment, along with her 2 young sons. But things would quickly begin to take a dark and twisted turn. Bundy began to exhibit unusual behavior, and Clark would quickly discover how willing she was to divulge in his depraved fantasies. The woman would begin photographing these warped events, and also began listening to her lover's desire for destruction. He took to the streets of the Sunset Strip in Hollywood, where he reportedly regularly brought home ladies of the night, often with the aid of Bundy. They would become infamously known as the Sunset Strip Slayers. While these women believed they were in for just another routine exchange, they would find that this wasn't the case. Instead, this unsuspecting couple would torture them before claiming their lives. By late spring of 1980, the pair had several homicides under their belt. They abducted, tortured, slaughtered, and dumped the bodies, some of which were subjected to decalations and severing of limbs. Then they would head home and brag about it, sometimes even to their friends. Although Clark committed many acts of violence, Bundy got her fair share too. In fact, after having told a former partner, John Murray, about their crimes, she ended his life, ensuring his silence. But it would be her role in the homicides that would be their undoing. Merely a week after the slaying of Murray, Bundy was overcome with guilt and spilled the beans to her fellow nurses, and soon the entire plot would unravel. Bundy tearfully admitted to all the wrongdoings, and Clark attempted to pin it all on her. But the juries saw through the veil and found his stories hard to believe. He was subsequently sentenced to capital punishment. His beloved accomplice attempted an insanity defense, but instead received 52 years to life for her role in luring unsuspecting victims, aiding in their torture, and homicide in the first degree. Number 4. Tina Leigh was crowned homecoming queen in 1992 at her Lake Holcomb High School, located in northwestern Wisconsin. In her adult life, Leigh found herself becoming a prison guard, where she would meet her significant other, so significant that she was willing to eliminate anyone for him. Initially assuming that her chosen lover was another prison guard, detective, or other law enforcement official, it came as a shock to many to discover that he was actually an inmate. Leigh's boyfriend was none other than convicted felon Darnell Smith, who'd been sentenced at the age of 19 for a violent assault. Despite knowledge of the reason for his conviction, the two became intertwined in a romantic relationship, only for a series of dark events to unfold. Smith had served 6 years and was released from prison, allowing his relationship with the prison guard to ensue. It was 2001 when the prisoner was released, allowing him to set up his home and continue his life, but it seemed that he had a hunger for taking the lives of others. Bobby D. Holder and Leigh became acquainted through Smith when he sold some custom tire rims to the ex-prisoner. It was thought that from here, Holder had developed a romantic interest in Leigh and would call her several times. Unbeknownst to him, this would lead to his demise. It was the 5th of July when Holder rang up Leigh again. Smith was sitting on the bed, wiping down a firearm, when he got up to whisper something to his girlfriend. He'd instructed her to lure Holder to the apartment by claiming that Smith wasn't there. Leigh did as she was told, only to be jumped by Smith and his brother Chaka. Not only did they fire at him, but they used a sharpened blade to strike him repeatedly, eventually leading to his unimaginable end. After that, his body was dismembered. Leigh and a neighbor, Andre Parker, would then drive the remains to Wisconsin, where the prison guard would partially bury them in a property owned by her father, allegedly hoping that he would find them. During the trial, the head-over-heels prison guard would testify against her accomplice. She claimed that he was controlling her and that she intentionally left a trail for the police to follow, but the jury had seen enough. Not only did Leigh lure the victim to the apartment and allow for the violent act to ensue, but she also willingly disposed of the body. The jury would find her guilty of homicide in the second degree, accomplice after the fact, and second-degree assault. She was subsequently sentenced to 210 months in prison for aiding her convicted boyfriend in homicide. Leigh was a homecoming queen turned prison guard turned prisoner, and now finds herself on the other side of the law. Smith found himself convicted of homicide in the first degree and faces a life sentence without parole, with hopes that he won't become the unexpected flame of another warden. Number 3. The scariest criminals of all are often the ones that you would least expect. This was true in the case of Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik, a couple from a Pakistani background. By 2013, Chicago-born Farouk, who was 28 years old at the time, was living the American dream. According to everyone who knew him, He had everything he could possibly need to be happy. Working as an environmental health specialist, he would earn a salary of $71,000 while working for the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health. Adding to his riches was that he'd just become a proud father. Farouk, a religious man, also loved his cars and showed an interest in firearms. According to an alleged dating profile, he was known to work on both vintage and modern cars, read religious literary material, travel, and engage in target practice with his friends and relatives. Co-workers at the agency found Farouk likable, and he certainly did not display any interest, need, or wants to end the lives of innocent people. But this was precisely what he would go on to do, along with his wife. 29-year-old Tashfeen Malik came from a prosperous Pakistani family who practiced Sufism. She'd grown up in Saudi Arabia and later returned to her homeland in pursuit of a pharmacology degree. Malik was studying at the Bahuddin Zakaria University, where her friends described her as a hardworking student who never showed signs of extremism. In fact, she was one of the top 5 students. Friends and relatives would describe Malik as social and would often participate in class activities, and again, this individual would display no interest in masochist activities. Malik's interest in her pharmacy studies, though, took a sharp turn in 2009, when she suddenly dove into Islamic studies instead. From there, her views on religion and politics would change, and in 2013 she would head out on a Hajj pilgrimage, during which she would meet Farouk. By 2014, the pair were married in Riverside County, and they celebrated their union, which saw a congregation of 300 people. Life for the couple seemed ordinary. They were unassuming and soft-spoken, and no one was prepared for what would come next. It was the 2nd of December, 2015, the day during which a holiday gathering was underway. The event was held at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino and hosted by the Department of Public Health. It was a Christmas party that saw the congregation of Farouk's coworkers. It was 11 a.m. when the unassuming happily married couple entered the scene, firearms in hand. Then they opened fire. Lead bounced off the walls and floors and struck several attendees, some of which were fatally wounded. When the havoc was over, their duty was done, and Farouk and Malik made a run for it. Everyone was trying to figure out what just happened. Ambulances were on the way, but 14 of those victims would end up in body bags, while another 22 were severely injured. When the news spread through the country and then back home, friends and family were in utter shock. It quickly became apparent that the two had kept quite a tight lid on their homicidal plot. No one knew a thing, and they wouldn't have expected it either. It wasn't long before law enforcement managed to catch up with Farouk and Malik. A hail of ammunition exchanged between the duo and police, and it left the unassuming yet brutal criminals deceased. Number 2. The wind whistled in the ears of 20-year-old Colleen Stan as she wandered along the roadside. It was the 19th of May, 1977, the day of her friend's birthday. That friend lived in Eugene, Oregon, a distance away from where Colleen was living. She didn't have any transport at the time and was waiting for a friendly passerby to stop for her and give her a ride. Cars zoomed by with no one stopping. The young woman found herself faced with the gleaming taillights every so often. Eventually, though, a nice-looking family pulled over. Inside the vehicle was a loving couple, Cameron and Janice Hooker, and in the back seat was a baby. The presence of the youngster made Colleen feel safer, and she happily hopped in the car. Many know exactly what came next. The story of Colleen Stan is one that continues to make headlines today. 30 minutes into the drive, Cameron pulled over onto the shoulder of the road. He turned around, sharpened blade in hand, and pressed it to the unsuspecting woman's throat. He threatened her life and placed a wooden headbox on her. Weighed down by the heavy headset, the now bound and gagged Colleen had no choice but to comply. Eventually, the car stopped at a house in Red Bluff, California, the home of the Hooker couple. It was here that she would undergo severe torture, leading her to become nicknamed the Girl in the Box. This was because, among being electrocuted, assaulted, and chained to the rafters, Colleen was kept in a box beneath the couple's waterbed. She would only be let out for a few hours in the night and then forced back in. Eventually, as years passed, Cameron and Janice began letting her out more regularly, and she was forced to perform chores and babysit the two children. Although she managed to get a job during her 7 years of captivity, Colleen never tried to escape. Her captors had warned her about a mysterious group called the Company that would end her life if she tried to flee. So the abuse continued. The merciless match would bruise and butcher the woman, seemingly their only victim, until one day Janice decided to turn on her companion. It was an unexpected twist, but in 1984, one of Colleen's abductors would help her escape. Janice had become disillusioned by the whole thing and confided in a religious leader, who advised that she take Colleen and her 2 children and leave. He also told her to turn her bow into the authorities, and that's precisely what she did. While her lover was at work, Janice vacated the house with Colleen and the children, allowing her former prisoner to contact her family. Subsequently, Cameron and Janice would be arrested. In 1985, Cameron Hooker, at the hands of his wife, would be sentenced to 104 years in prison for the kidnap and torture of Colleen. As for his partner in crime turned police informant, she was released after having testified against her husband. Number 1. No list of the most notorious and scariest couples is complete without the mention of the most infamous partnership behind it all. It was the frightening power of Bonnie and Clyde that served as the inspiration and stimulus behind the world's most prolific serial slaughtering sweethearts. Bonnie Parker's childhood seemed to be an exception to the rule of homicidal maniacs and what drives them to slay. She was a bright student who took a keen interest in poetry and literature. Bonnie was described as being exceptionally pretty and aspired to be an actress. It's safe to say that during her youth, she exhibited no indication of the criminal path she would go on. Clyde Barrow was no different. He was born in Tellico, Texas, to a close-knit family. He was a small and unassuming boy with ambitions of becoming a musician. During his childhood, he would learn the guitar and took an interest in the saxophone. It wasn't until he was a bit older that he became influenced by his older brother, who led him down the route of wrongdoing. When she was 19 and working as a waitress, Bonnie found herself married to an imprisoned man convicted of homicide, and Clyde was unmarried, 21 years old, and in search of an associate. The two would meet in Texas in 1930 through a friend and were immediately smitten. The romance was budding and sparking off the scariest union that would ever plague the country. Before becoming the most prolific slaughterers of their time, their love was interrupted by Clyde's arrest. He'd been convicted of several counts of auto theft, but the steel bars that were meant to confine him were no match for the deep love that the couple had shared. Bonnie smuggled a firearm into the prison, marking the very moment that their escape plan was set in stone. Their escape, though, was not to last, and just a few weeks later, he was apprehended again and sentenced to 14 years of hard labor. And again, the plans for escape were set in motion. This time, instead of threatening anyone with a firearm, he pretended to have sustained an accidental injury by severing one of his toes, resulting in a permanent limp. This effort revealed the lengths that this criminal was willing to go to escape custody and resume his criminal activities with his beloved. While he was severing his toe, though, Clyde's mother had already convinced the judge to grant him parole, and he was released just 2 weeks later. Following this, of course, the loving couple reunited. At first, the pair, joined by a few others, would commit a series of robberies at banks and small businesses, leading them to be constantly pursued by law enforcement. At one point, Bonnie was arrested following a failed robbery attempt. While awaiting trial, she claimed she'd been kidnapped by the Barrow gang. She wrote poetry. One of her poems relays her chronicles with Clyde, saying, quote, "Someday they'll go down together. They'll burn them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." Following her release, the gang activity commenced, wreaking havoc across the states, jumping from place to place, holding businesses under duress, threatening the community as a whole. A slew of robberies would soon lead to a brief exchange of bullets with law enforcement. Bonnie and Clyde, though, escaped and resumed their criminal activities, with bodies being left in their wake. By 1933, they were wanted for several homicides, including that of law enforcement officials, which inevitably landed them on the FBI's most wanted list. Despite this, the infamous couple were able to elude the authorities for another year. Law enforcement, though, were reluctant to give up on their chase and would set a trap that would end this homicidal spree once and for all. Following the slaying of a fellow police officer in Oklahoma, Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed on Highway 154, Louisiana, following a weeks-long chase. Through a hail of lead, the onslaught carried out by the notorious couple had ceased. By now, they were so famous that souvenir seekers flocked to the scene, making off with clothing pieces, locks of hair, and most disturbingly, one of Clyde's ears. Bonnie's prison poem had not aged well for the couple. Despite their harrowing crimes, heinous homicides, and fear that this scary couple had unleashed, the story of Bonnie and Clyde became romanticized, with retellings painting a picture of love and loss instead of the darkness and cruelty that they're truly associated with. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.